Hi everyone, it's my pleasure to introduce Yuan Ngiam first. He is a MD at NUS Singapore. He is also at their School of Public Health, the Chief Technology Officer, as well as a consultant for the Department of Surgery. And he'll be telling us about implementing healthcare AI in clinical practice.
Hi, my name is Professor Yuan Ngiam from the National University Health System in Singapore. I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to give a talk on implementing healthcare AI in clinical practice. As you know, the pandemic has triggered a change in the way we approach healthcare delivery, especially in using technologies such as AI to enhance the way we deliver healthcare to our patients. This is akin to the fourth industrial revolution in the enterprises, from mechanization to mass production to computers to cyber physical systems. In healthcare, it's similar, where we started with paper records, and now we are using electronic medical records to transact most of our healthcare actions. But we're moving towards AI, where AI can give predictions and generate decision support systems that help us make better decisions for our care of our patients. And the next step is really to move towards what we term as cyber physical systems, such as cloud robotics. Now, in developing clinical AI, there are a number of steps. First, we start with the clinical problem definition, and we then collect data and clean the data so that we can build AI models that can address the questions related to the data, to the problem statement. And then we build these models that allow us to make predictions of the clinical problem. And we consider human-machine interfaces that are important to ensure that clinicians use the predictions well. And finally, we'll deploy the model in clinical production so that we can address the clinical problem. On the outside here are some domains that AI tools can be deployed to help clinicians make better decisions, such as augmenting the doctor in automated diagnosis, of which we'll describe a few use cases. Oncology models, we want to improve safety of the patient in hospital, for example, by predicting falls, deep vein thrombosis, and readmission risks. There are, of course, discovery applications that we would like to undertake in this era of the pandemic. We think that there are certainly opportunities in drug discovery applications and effectiveness analysis. In terms of optimizing care, we can improve the way we transact queuing optimization so that patients have to wait less. And for quite a while, NUHS has been undertaking a value-driven outcomes initiative where patients, where we measure quality of care versus cost rather than pay-per-use type of business model. And lastly, we can use AI to help us predict patients' behaviors and incentivize healthy behaviors to treat chronic diseases that are so prevalent in our population. Now, to develop AI tools, there are a number of challenges. Principle of which that we need to have large data sets that are required to train models and access to multiple data sources and mapping data sets. There's also the issue of the data being noisy and or messy, so that these need to be resolved before they can be used to train AI models. In healthcare, there are a number of coding standards such as ICD-10 and SNOMED, which need to be rectified and mapped so that the same diagnosis can be carried throughout the longitudinal patient episodes. When we develop AI tools, we definitely require specialized hardware to undertake some of these tasks. As most of you know, we require GPUs and supercomputers. Ideally, these resources should be centralized so that we achieve economies of scale and scalability that is required in the building of these AI tools. We also require data science talent, so we need to work very closely with computer scientists and clinicians to develop appropriate models that address the clinical question. Lastly, we need an environment in which we can deploy the AI tools in an effective way. So together with these challenges, we have to address issues of security and governance, such as anonymizing or de-identifying data so that it can be used freely by data scientists to develop models. In that consideration, we need to differentiate between the kind of access that people are provided between retail versus power users. As similarly, it goes for hardware as well, where we need to differentiate between core and enhanced users, right? So core users would be users who require relatively less compute resources up to a workstation level, and enhanced users require server level computing as well as supercomputers. And of course, we want to align our data sets to international common data models such as OMAP as well. So in order to achieve all these, we have developed a platform called the Discovery AI platform. The idea of Discovery AI is that we have a central place to aggregate our data so that we can train multiple AI models in a modular fashion. And when we train these models, we can then test these models in near production in a stackable format. So we collect all the clinical information. We pass that information through multiple AI modules, which then produces clinical alerts back to the EMR system. And on the back end, we are able to track the outcome of the predictions and the outcome of the patient and match them up and be able to undertake things like incremental learning to improve the model on a versioned basis. So to do this, this is the Discovery AI architecture. So broadly speaking, there are two main segments to it. On the left here, there's a segment that is responsible for what we term as near production testing. So we get data on a daily basis from our EMR system called CDOC and CCDR. This data is passed through the master virtual machine. It is first, the data is first aligned and cleaned before it's passed through the different AI models that we have built. This model then signals back to the EMR system to give support and alerts the doctors if there are any specific decision support messages. On the left here is where we have undertaken the research and development side of Discovery AI. We have large databases, everything from genomic data to image data and structured data in between. We also provide virtual machines that allow our collaborators to come in, deploy their models and train their models, but they're not able to take out the data. And in this way, through the master access control, we are able to control the access to the data and ensure equity of the data sharing between all parties in the Discovery AI platform. So for example, if two users want to collaborate on a particular project, we are able to extract the data and deposit it into a new virtual machine where they can then build specific models, test them, and push them towards near production testing in this area over here. And of course, all this sits within a firewall and internet separated environment. So this platform is highly secure and allows multiple users to build their models and test it. So one of the challenges we've had is the provisioning of the data to our users. And to address some of these issues of data provision, we have set up this interface called Atlas built on the OMAP common data model. This allows the users to be able to query the underlying data sets, which is in the millions, and to derive insight without the overheads of extracting the data as well as processing the data. So this Atlas interface allows you to build cohorts and run simple statistical analysis on the cohorts that are built. So I'm going to share with you some examples of clinical AI tools that I've built in the past. So one of the earlier AI tools we built was using a free text predictor called Augurium. So what it does is that it's designed to read the emergency department's doctor's case notes and make a determination in this particular case whether or not the patient has appendicitis, and give you a percentage to tell you to tell the doctor what's the likelihood of appendicitis. And it also captures the final diagnosis upon discharge. And this final diagnosis is paired with the prediction. And the data is then used to improve the model on the back end. So this is the attention layer output of the ED node. So you can see that the words are highlighted here in red. The density of the color gives you the weight in which the machine has given to this particular words and sentences. In this particular case, it predicts for high risk of appendicitis, and these are the features that it has chosen to be important to that diagnosis. Another tool that we have built is a 30-day readmission predictor. This is not novel. However, what's different is that we've aligned it to the post-prediction output. Not only does it predict the 30-day readmission, but it charts the post-prediction outcomes and tracks the patient over time to see what is their status of their readmission if it does happen. And then that data is used to retrain the model. We also have a separate model for disease progression, whereby we take the past data of the patient to a cut point, and then it's mapped forwards over a time series in a time series fashion. So this is a use case where we are using this time series model to predict the kidney function of a chronic kidney disease patient measured by what you call the glomerular filtration rate. So the higher the GFR value, the better the kidney function. So you can see that in this particular patient, with all these episodes of visits to the hospital, we wanted to make a prediction at 32 weeks. And this is the forward prediction that the machine has generated based on the past history of the patient. The yellow tells you the ground truth, what is actually happening to the patient going forwards. So this is a time series model where it can predict a particular outcome going forwards. And here we can see at the 52nd week, there is a dip in the predicted GFR value. So that might alert the clinician to address some issues at this point here. So going forwards, we have improved our text NLP models, all right, to use BioBird by Google. So this pre-trained model allows us to more effectively encode the free text that is being used for prediction. We also include categorical and numeric data, and we concatenate it before we use it for the final prediction. In this particular case, we have used it to predict breast cancer patients or non-breast cancer patients, just using free text, categorical, and numeric data. So in this particular breast cancer detection model, we want to use the clinician's free text to be able to predict whether a patient, what's the likelihood of a patient having breast cancer. So this this model was built with a test set of about 8,000 patients, and we've trained it using the model architecture as described above, and these are the results, right? So it has a in terms of breast cancer, the overall F1 score is excellent for non-breast cancer prediction, but not so good for breast cancer prediction. We've adjusted the threshold to 0.985 because this is a good example of the clinical use case, right? Because when we look at breast cancer prediction, we want to reduce the number of patients who are false positives, because that will create a lot of unnecessary anxiety in women, but yet we want to be able to pick up women who have actual breast cancer. So in this particular case, it bears mentioning that the clinical deployment of this particular breast cancer model has an impact in how we adjust the threshold of this model. So for example, we are willing to accept a number of missed breast cancers, because these patients here were predicted non-breast cancers. They are not lost to follow up, in the sense that they will also be subject to the national breast cancer screening, whereas these patients that are predicted with breast cancers will be asked to go for a mammogram, and of which about 40% will have breast cancer. So this is far better than the current rate of screening in Singapore, or breast cancer screening in Singapore, which stands at only 20% at best. So the AUC of this model is 0.73, and that AUC has improved since with some further optimization. And this is a t-SNE visualization of our sentence embedding. So essentially what we are seeing here is that most of the breast cancers, i.e. 71 of the 159 cases, about 45% of breast cancer cases fall within this category, this red box here, right? And it tells you that the older this y-axis here is, this box here really tells us that most of the patients are expectedly within the older age group. And the bottom representation here is that the predicted probabilities are also in the same area as we can see here, right? So the higher predicted probability all clustered together in this box here. So we built a number of such AI tools, everything from readmissions prediction to breast cancer detection. The next question is, how do we put this in clinical practice? So to do this, we had to build a separate platform that allows us to deploy this in clinical production, and that's called Endeavour AI. So Endeavour AI is a different platform because, as you can see here, what we described earlier as Discovery AI allows us to aggregate data and build models, AI models, and test AI models at near production. So this includes clinical trial and research data, and we have numerous AI models that we have developed in the past few years. This uses the identified data, and this is done as a research and development platform. So what we built now is an Endeavour AI, which is a production level platform that allows us to consume data from the EMR system. So we are transiting to the Epic EMR system, where the live data is fed into the different AI models, and it generates what we call best practice advisories back to the EMR system to advise doctors to alter their practice depending on the AI output. We also have another layer here called the Healthcare Commercial Cloud. This is a secure commercial cloud instance that allow us to interact with the internet, because these two layers here are internet separated, whereas this is internet connected. And it also allows us to collaborate with industries to onboard their innovative AI tools that we can test before we deploy here in Endeavour AI. So we call this the Discovery AI Tribrid, that allows us to maximize the best of research data as well as the best of commercial innovation. So one of the key factors of why we want to build Endeavour is because we wanted a live system. In other words, the predictions are given in real time rather than in a delayed fashion. It might seem quite obvious that this needs to be done, but in practical deployment, it is quite challenging to have a live AI system running. So we built Endeavour with an underlying messaging system called Kafka. So we are able to stream data on demographics, visits and encounters, labs, radiology, clinical notes, medications and procedures, as well as other data like finance and other social media data that is being streamed. Now, this is built on a container-based microservices architecture. So you can see here that the stream data is subscribed by various microservices. For example, we have microservices that do AI services that we've mentioned earlier, or chatbot services that we've built, things like image services, so the ability to AI to read certain images. And we can then build service applications that leverage the different microservices, right? So these, for example, we have a length of stay predictor AI that leverages on analytic kind of services that feeds off the data stream. So this microservices architecture, Kafka messaging, gives us the scalability, the flexibility, as well as the speed of live predictions. So to bring this to practice, we need to consider how we want to display this to our clinicians. So for example, this is an example of what we've seen earlier, but in practice, right? So Augurium is our free text predictor. So it reads the free text of clinicians and predicts and produces predictions. So in this case, it predicts the estimated length of stay at the point of presentation at the emergency department. So that's 2 days here. And in this particular case, it predicts a high probability of appendicitis based on the free text written by the clinician, and lower risk for all these other predictions. Another prediction here is estimated length of stay of 5 days for a patient with sort of what we term as medium risk chest pain diagnoses. So this is completely appropriate. It's also able to display a number of all the data points in live view. So this is a screen capture, but in reality, these proportions and these kind of admission diagnoses are all presented in a live fashion. So this moves second by second so that clinicians and administrators are able to discern what are the what is the state of all the patients that are being seen in the emergency department at any one time. So we have numerous other projects. For example, we have a project that looks at pharmacogenomics. Pharmacogenomics is a relatively new endeavor in NUHS. So what we want to be able to do is to use the Endeavour AI's live streaming architecture to be able to pick up patients with potential pharmacogenomic drug gene pairs that might affect the way we prescribe medications. So for example, when the doctor orders a particular medication, it will check against its database, both in the clinical database as well as in the research databases, whether patients have particular genes that might affect this particular drug that the doctor is prescribing, and then trigger a pharmacogenomic alert to the clinician. Now, there's a difference between what happens here within EPIC and what happens here within Endeavour AI. So within EPIC, they are picking up clinical grade drug gene pairs that then trigger the alert immediately to the doctor. Whereas if they find a drug gene pair here in the research database because of prior sequencing events, then it will trigger another alert to the clinician, but this time around on our landing page, meaning that the clinician would be able to see the different predictions of potential drug gene pair interactions and order specific gene tests so that the clinician can alter the drug that they are prescribing to the patient. So whether they alter the dose or they change the medications that they are going to be ordering. So this is how a landing page would look like. So every patient will have a single landing page that looks like this. So it's a timeline from capturing all the previous past episodes of the patient in summary, okay, to the present. And you can see the dotted line here is the future, right? So future can consist of things like, predictable things like appointments and future scans and medications that are going to be given. It will also contain things like predictions. So here you can see, for example, the readmission risk score is really high for this patient at 30 days from today. So you can see the prediction description here, where the readmission risk is high and what its prediction is based on. So as I mentioned earlier, all of the tools have some kind of attention layer, and it's able to provide the explainability to the doctor. So this landing page is important because it gives you an overall view of what happened to the patient, past, present, and potentially in the future. And this is where all the AI predictions would be mapped against the patient's timeline, and it will give us a patient journey kind of perspective. So another outcome that we hope to use AI for is the use of AI chatbots. So we've built a chatbot that is conversational in nature. So this particular example here is tied in together with our app. So we have a health app for our patients where they can make appointments, take out their medications, and so on and so forth. But we also have a chat function that allows the patient to chat directly with the chatbot. Okay, and the chatbot is able to have conversational replies to the patient for, in this case, health coaching purposes. So the underlying chatbot conversational module is built on a number of AI parts. So everything from this empathetic computing module, where we can do things like emotional classifying, user profiling, topic classifying, to what we call the conditional neural generator, depending on the topic and the emotion classifiers and topic classifiers output, it would then generate an appropriate response to the patient. So this is yet another use of AI in actual clinical practice deployment. And it ties in nicely with all the other AI tools that were built and described previously, where we can then now predict certain things that might be beneficial for the patient's healthcare journey. So with that, I'm going to bring my presentation to an end. I thank you for your attention, and I may be reached at the email below. Thank you.